Okay, today with Mr. Greg. Gregory Feith, after 22 years separated, too young to retire?
Too young to retire.
Too young to retire from the NTSB as a senior safety investigator. He was the investigator in charge of many high-profile disaster investigations, including the 1996 Value jet crash in the Everglades, 1997, a CFIT accident in Guam involving the Caribbean Air Boeing 747, in 1994, an American Eagle ATR-72 crash in Roselawn. He's ATP rated and trained on numerous air transport and GA aircraft. Greg flies his PA-260 as a self-proclaimed evangelist for aviation safety. Does that mean you work out of a tent?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a traveling road show, and I have some really good stuff that I'll sell you to drink, kind of like the Jim Jones Kool-Aid.
It's when he brings out the cross, you got to kind of watch that.
Yeah.
He speaks about risks and hot issues that comprise flight safety and GA in the airline industry. Greg is seen regularly as a safety expert on NBC, MSNBC, the History Channel, PBS, and other networks. He works as an aviation safety and security consultant and expert witness, in addition to his aviationspeakers.com engagements. Mr. Greg Feith.
Thank you, buddy. Well, it's always an honor because the FAA and the NTSB never really had a good relationship, but they continue to invite me back and let me use their air-conditioned forum. So I really appreciate the fact that I still have a pretty good relationship with the FAA. So I'd just like to say thank you. I just gave away 3 awards on behalf of the FAA earlier, the General Aviation Awards, to some very deserving people. And they are the epitome of what aviation and aviation safety is all about. And really, every time I do these safety presentations, that's what it's all about, is trying to educate, trying to at least enhance your knowledge in a way that you don't really get out of a magazine article and things like that. There are hundreds of forums that are constantly going on around here. A good friend of mine just presented yesterday with regard to single pilot IFR, and Jeff and I have been friends for a long time. And I always appreciate going to these kinds of forums because even as an ATP, double I, and all the things that I've done, they always say, well, your private pilot certificate is your license to learn. Guess what? Even if you have an ATP and a double I, you still have a license to learn because you can't know enough. And so I always appreciate listening to other speakers because I find out things. And I'm sure that in just our conversations, which I've done in the past, I've learned from you as well, just in my interactions. So this is an opportunity to not only listen to a guy like me, try and give you a little bit of different perspective, but then share that information amongst the peer group and the people that aren't occupying these chairs. This year I wanted to try and break it up a little bit and focus on the PIC. How many PICs do we have in the room? Really? Okay. Well, let's see. I had a majority of you, but now the question is, do you want to really be the PIC? How many really want to be the PIC? Now see, the FAA is standing back there, and they're going to have a plate back there. Pull your pilot certificate out right now, and as you walk out the door, hand it to them, because you just became the pilot in confusion. And the last thing the FAA wants to see is all of these hands up going, man, those are all pilots in confusion. We're going to have problems. Just hand your certificate over right now. That's usually the problem, is the pilot in confusion, not necessarily the pilot in command. And this is where I wanted to focus, because in a lot of the general aviation accidents that I've examined and studied and had to investigate, there is confusion in the cockpit. You know that without having somebody sitting there in the right seat, whether it's your flight instructor or if you fly in a crewed airplane, having a second pilot there, all that responsibility falls in your lap. Not only do you have to command the flight, but now you have to perform all the actions. And when you look at it, the FAA has said, basically, that you can join this elite group if you're going to be a pilot in confusion. I mean, we got some very notable people up here, especially Wrong-Way Corrigan over there, I mean, very accomplished aviator, just went the wrong direction. But when we talk about what it is that you have is this responsibility when you bear the title PIC. What does that really mean? Well, the FAA says in 91.3 that you have all the responsibility. This is you. You command it, you control it, you determine the actions, you execute those actions, and if there are inactions or improper actions, you bear the responsibility for all of that. You can't push that off on someone else. You can't point at ATC and say, well, they gave me a wrong clearance, and they did this, and they did that, and you can't pass it off on a mechanic going, they didn't fix the airplane, because that regulation right there says you are the final authority to everything that occurs. Are there extenuating circumstances? Are there outside influences that may cause you to do something or deviate from the regulations? Absolutely. But this regulation says that you bear that command and control responsibility. And in general aviation, especially in a lot of the accidents, that's the problem, is that the pilots will take off. They have believed, for whatever reason, they have done all of their due diligence in making the flight happen, have done all of their pre-flight planning, are prepared for that particular flight. They get into flight, and then all of a sudden they get themselves into a situation for which they're looking for help because the circumstances have gotten well beyond their control, and they've let it escalate, and they don't cut it off and do some sort of corrective action in the meantime. So when we look at it, now, how many people see the Book of Regulations as punitive? See, nobody's going to raise their hand because the FAA is standing back there, because they're actually taking names and seat numbers. There's a number on each one of your seats. They know exactly who you are from where you're sitting. The problem is that's the way we look at it. We look at these books of FARs as punitive, and they really aren't. You have to look at the FARs as tools. It is another tool in your toolbox. If you really think about it, other than 91.3 that says you bear the responsibility, that's really a checklist item to get you into the mindset that, okay, this is all on me. And as you go through the Federal Aviation Regulations, if you look at all of the regulations for pre-flight planning and instrument currency and things like that, that's really a checklist for you to look back at yourself and go, okay, I have done pre-flight planning. I have looked at alternate airports. I have looked at all the weather. I have looked at all of the aspects that I need to look at as a pilot in command to conduct this flight safely. That's the way the FAA looks at it. It's not, well, man, they're going to you didn't do that pre-flight, you're violated. That's not the way the FAA looks at it, at least not the people that I know in the FAA. But that's the perception that is out there. And if you take a different outlook and a different view of those Federal Aviation Regulations, you see that it really is a checklist. You go through all of those things. It helps you. Yeah, I did all the pre-flight planning. Yeah, I have to make sure that I am, quote, fit to fly. So 61 tells me that medically I got to be qualified to do this, 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 and this. It's really basically an introspective look at yourself and the performance that you're gonna exercise when you execute that particular flight as the pilot in command. 91.3 also says, basically, that you really need to be all-knowing, all-seeing, and very futuristic. That's why Carson and his Carnac, and of course, you know, there's my crystal ball. I got to figure it all out. And then this is my favorite, the smartest man in the world. You know, he was the most interesting guy. He knew everything, could do everything, can do everything. That's what the Federal Aviation Regulations really, want you to be, especially 91.3. The problem is, can that actually happen? Well, if you look at John, I'll show you how smart I am, because I, little lady, am the PIC. And when you bear that title of PIC, you bear that responsibility to not only determine whether you are capable of flying the aircraft, but that aircraft is capable of accomplishing the mission that you intend for that aircraft. And let me just give you a little example. I'll show you why I'm the smartest guy in the room and why I try to fulfill what the FAA wants out of Part 91.3. And I need a volunteer, and not people that I know. So, and I know a few of you in here. Are you good with math in your head? Come, it's simple math. It's real simple math. Are you a pilot? Are you a PIC? Are you a pilot in command and you can't do simple math? The FAA, right here, second row, second seat. Simple math. Can we do simple math? You know, it's just numbers. It's real easy numbers. Okay? Good, you got a pen and a paper. I want you to pick a number between 1 and 25. And don't tell me what it is, just write it down. Okay? And then I want you to take the next sequential number from that and add it to your number. Got it? Then I want you to add 9 to that number. Okay? So you got your number. You're sure? And your math is good. I want you to divide that number by 2. And then subtract your original number from that final answer that you just came up with. And I want you to think about the answer. Are you thinking about it? I'm trying to get this mental telepathy because I am a PIC and I have to know everything because that's what the FAA expects of me. So I need you to concentrate. I need you to look right here. You can't look. I need you to look right here. Your answer is 5.
Correct.
I am the smartest guy in the room. When you look at it, that little exercise is no matter what you do, the parts and the pieces that you plug in, you're always going to come up with an answer. But the answer has to be determined whether or not it is the right answer or the wrong answer. Because when you start to plug and play all of the pieces that we are responsible for in just the planning of a flight, how many people flew into Oshkosh? And as a friend of mine asked yesterday, when did you start planning for this flight? Yesterday? The day before you flew in here? 2 months ago? Last year? 5 years ago? Last month? Come on, Jim. You should have been working on it a lot longer than that. Mr. Placus here has a very storied career with the FAA, almost 40 years with the FAA, right? 38 years. There you go. So I can pick on Jim because I've known him a very long time. But the point being is that you have to come up with the right answer. The question is, what is the right answer? Because the FAA, as the PIC, expects you to have the right answer every time you get in that airplane. Now, is that answer going to change? Absolutely, because as you get into the flight, things are going to change. Weather's going to change. Status of the aircraft's going to change. Your own physical status is going to change. Your own capabilities may change. So you have to look at it from that perspective. So the question is, why do so many smart PICs still make mistakes? And we're not talking about just little general aviation guys. We're talking about Delta landing at the wrong airport. We're talking about Southwest landing at the wrong airport. We're talking about Air Canada pilots that almost took out 3 airplanes at San Francisco recently. These are professional pilots going through a professional pilot training course who have a lot of years of, quote, experience based on the number of hours they've flown, yet they still make mistakes. And oh, by the way, it's not just one pilot, it's 2 pilots. And the question is, why does that happen? If we have better training, we have better skills, we have better aircraft, we have better communication, then why is it that they can't find themselves at the right airport?
Physiology.
Almost. Psychology. Part of it, and I'll talk about that. Thanks for bringing that up, Jim. But there's a combination there. We look at it. It doesn't matter what the accident. You have a pilot who, in a Cessna 206, puts 5 people in the airplane, his wife, his 2 kids, and a 16-year-old babysitter, and tries to put those 5 people in 3 seats, and then has over 600 pounds of 2x4s, concrete, tiles, everything else in their airplane, and full gas, and tries to take off out of Merrill Field in Alaska, and ends up maybe a mile away and crashing into a berm in an abandoned car lot and kills his 4-year-old. The psychology of what are you thinking you can do and accomplish? I don't care how extraordinary you think your pilot skills are. Who's going to help you in this dire situation once you've broken ground? You're the only one. You can't call for help. There's no CFI there. The question is, why did this guy think that he could do it, and why did he even bother to take off? And then he has his family on board, and he killed his 4-year-old. 600 pounds, and he was about 4 inches out of the FCG. And the question is, why? What's the psychology there? When you look at some of these other accidents, this was a mid-air collision over Niagara Falls that I did years ago. And there's always been an established pattern, but on this particular day, you got 2 pilots, one coming from the Canada side, one coming from the US side, same altitude, opposite direction, and they literally fly into each other. And they basically saw each other. And the question is, why on this day they're at the same altitude when there's always been an established pattern? What changed for those pilots that day? What changed? Because they've been flying this route for over a year, both of them. What changed on that particular day? We are human. We change every single day. You woke up today different than you woke up yesterday, and you're going to wake up tomorrow different than you woke up today. Whether it's because you're sick, you have something on your mind, you have a different attitude, the weather's changed, something is going to influence you that you changed tomorrow, and it's different than what happened today. Same with flying. You have a lot of confidence yesterday, not so confident today, because why? You have an internal or an external influence. The weather isn't as good. Well, I'll use the opposite, because yesterday the weather was lousy. So yesterday you weren't real confident because the weather was bad. Today you're more confident because the sun is shining. There are a lot of external factors that really have an influence, a significant influence, whether you're conscious of it or not conscious of it, on your decision making and how you feel when you get into that aircraft. And we all talk about trying to protect. It's what happens when you talk too much in the morning. We all try to maintain this level of professionalism. And people go, well, you know what? If you act professional, you're going to fly professional. Well, not necessarily, because I just showed you some events where you had some very good professional pilots who put themselves in a bad position. But the professionalism, that is the spirit and intent of professionalism. That's the mindset. Making sure that you are very comfortable, not only with all the things that you've had to factor in conducting this flight, but you're very, very comfortable in your own personal skills, abilities, and knowledge, not only to handle the flight itself, but handle the aircraft that you're flying. And I'll talk about a couple of events here shortly. So when we look at it, what is it with that much authority? The PIC is usually the cause. We have very, very few accidents where the PIC isn't the direct cause of the accident. They've put the airplane into a position. Oh, the airplane broke up in flight. Yeah, because the pilot tried to fly through a level 5 thunderstorm. The pilot put himself in this position, couldn't land in a crosswind. Why? Because they didn't have the experience, and they tried to do something beyond not only their capabilities, but possibly the airplane. All of these types of accidents there's just a very simple solution, and that is having the pilot in command assess fairly and objectively, without all of this emotional baggage, thinking that they're captain courageous, that their skills, abilities, and knowledge are a lot higher than they actually are. I got 400 hours. I can go from a Cessna 172 to a Pilatus PC-12. No, you can't. You may think you can, but you really don't have that level of experience to handle a machine like that. And if you do, you better have a mentor pilot for 50 to 100 hours to make sure that you are in a state of mind and you have developed those personal skills, abilities, and knowledge to handle a machine like that. And I'll talk about a couple of accidents as well regarding that. We've seen a lot of Cirrus accidents, the transition. The Cirrus airplane is one of the safest airplanes in the world. Yet we have a lot of Cirrus accidents, and there are a lot of Cirrus accidents where the guys don't pull the chute. And guys is a generic term, whether it's women or men, they don't pull that chute. And the reason for a lot of it is because high stress, high anxiety, fight or flight. They get so paralyzed with fear that they go into brain lock, they don't pull. But the airplane is so out of control, they don't know. And even if they did pull, they probably ripped the chute off because the airplane is heading at the ground at 80 degrees nose low at Mach 4. So even with the parachute, it may not be the saving grace. What we tend to do as pilots, especially, where's my buddy Alex? Those of you who've seen my presentations, I use Alex quite a bit. Alex, stand up real quick. Alex is 17. He is now one of the newest pilots in our ranks. He just got his private pilot certificate. He is currently working on an instrument rating. I've known Alex since well before he was able to get his pilot certificate, and I've always appreciated the fact that he introduced himself with his mom and his dad, and they came up and they talked to me because he's watched the shows that I've done. And I've watched this young man grow up, and he really epitomizes not only a passion, but I think from listening to me and just knowing him as well as I do, he does have that mental structure to know what his limitations are. And when you talk about Clint Eastwood and he goes, man's got to know his limitations, we have to be able to not only know them, but accept them. And a lot of times we don't. And as the pilot in command, and he can tell you, what's the euphoria when that instructor gets out of the airplane for the first time and you solo by yourself? What's that feeling? And if you can think back to that feeling, it's just me. Anything that happens, it's just me. I can't go, dude, take over. I'm gonna mess this up. There is no dude to take over. And so now it's up to me. And now you've been flying for 5,000 hours, and now you're a dark and stormy night, 25,000 feet, and things are starting to go wrong. All of a sudden now, you don't have dude take over. It's all up to me. But some of the accidents, and I'll talk about them here, we'll talk about the fact that the pilot tries to defer the flying of the aircraft to someone else who can't help them. And a lot of times it's air traffic control. So what are the pilot causes? In general terms, we look at it. Improper, inadequate, basic airmanship. And I've talked about this and talked about this and talked about this and talked about it till I'm blue in the face. But every underlying cause of just about every accident, big or small, basic airmanship skills. We're not talking Chuck Yeager. We're not talking, astronaut, rocket scientist type stuff. We're talking basic skills. How is it that a pilot who has 60 hours as a student pilot getting ready to do his private can't land in a 5-knot crosswind in a Cessna 172? Is it the fault of the PIC, that being the flight instructor, or is it the fault of the student? Or is it a combination of both? And if you haven't developed that skill as a 60-hour student pilot going for a private pilot's license, now when that flight instructor is no longer in that aircraft and you're flying into a place that you've never been before and you got trees on one side and the wind is blowing and now you got a 10-knot crosswind, if you couldn't handle 5 knots, what do you think 10 knots is going to do to you? The fact is, where is the deficiency? And who is the deficient one? The instructor for not giving enough instruction, or the pilot for not developing that skill and asking to develop that skill even further? Because that all forms the basis for the way you're going to operate in the future. That's the information, the knowledge that you build your base on. And if you don't have a solid base, then everything you build on top of it is going to come crashing down when you least expect it. When we talk about improper, inadequate aeronautical decision making, you've heard me preach over and over and over again. Advisory Circular 60-22. It's 30 pages of great stuff that the FAA puts out for free. Just go look at it on the internet. It is awesome stuff. It demonstrates how we as humans make decisions, what influences the decision. But what is the biggest influence on the decision making of any pilot? You've heard it over the years. They say, oh, you know what? Ego is the biggest driver. It isn't. Ego is one piece of this thing we call personality. I could do a personality study. You may not have an ego. You may be the most humble person. But if your attitude is a type A or a type B, whether you're, real aggressive or real passive, that's the way you're going to fly your airplane. Not necessarily the ego to try and, hold my beer, watch this kind of thing. But it's your personality, because your personality resides with you 24/7, 365. Your ego only comes out at specific times. And the more you drink, the bigger your ego. Trust me. Been there, done that, especially in college when I was at Embry-Riddle in the bars. Oh, yeah, hon, yeah, I fly all the time. Yeah, sure, let's go flying. Yeah, you want to go fly? I'm 17 years old, but don't worry about it. I can fly, but I can't drive. So, ego is a driving factor, but it's only one piece. But your personality is continuous. And that's really what influences decision making. If you're hard-headed, you're not receptive to input from others, been there, done that, I don't need your input, then you should not be in an airplane. And a lot of those things we can't do a character study of when I was with the NTSB or even in my afterlife, because the people I'm dealing with are no longer around for me to ask the question or at least size up their personality to see why some of the things that they decided to do, they did, because I don't have them to talk to. When we talk about it, lack of operational discipline, and I'm not talking about, anything other than the fact that this is what the flight manual says. This is what the checklist says. This is what the FAA says. This is what the approach procedure says. Why are you deviating from it? You didn't develop the flight manual. Why do you think that the DH is at 650 feet, not 630 feet, not 600 feet? And why are you busting that MDA? What makes you so special? Well, I know the airport so well. I know there's nothing down there. But the FAA says this is the minimum. So why am I going to deviate? Because I can. Because I think I can. Because I have the skills, abilities, and knowledge. I already know the terrain. That's my home airport. I'm not worried about it. I want to land. Those are the kinds of decisions that you may get away with the first time, maybe the second time. Third time's a charm. You probably won't walk away from that particular event. So it's all about losing operational discipline. And that's what causes a loss of control. I'm one of the judges for the Innovation Awards. 3 high school students won that $25,000 prize Tuesday night. Sharp kids. One is learning to fly, the other 2 don't fly. Yet they developed a system, an eyepiece, that gives you information as you're making turns and flying your airplane that will help reduce, if not eliminate, loss of control accidents. But it goes well beyond that. I can have all the devices in the world, just like all the technology in the world, all that pretty stuff that's presented. If I don't use it for what it is worth, then it's not worth anything. And it all falls on me, the human, to prevent a loss of control, to prevent a CFIT, to prevent spatial disorientation. Not an autopilot, not the technology, not the airplane, me, the PIC. And if I put myself in a bad situation, then I can probably expect bad results, because my indecision, my lack of confidence is only going to get worse, not better. Pilot experience and training. And again, it's one thing to be training on a regular basis. I go every year. I get my annual flight review. I do all of these things. That's great. Even if you get an IPC every 6 months, or you fulfill the regulation of doing your 6.6 and basically 6.5, the fact is that proficiency or just currency to meet the regulation? My duty and responsibility is to meet what the FAA says I need to meet from a standards point of view. But if I don't learn from it and I'm not proficient, then I don't care how current you are. I've investigated instrument current pilots who have crashed airplanes. And the question is why? I've investigated commercial airline pilots who have just come out of training and still crashed the airplane. And the question is why? Apparently it wasn't the training. It was all of the things that they did in their normal operational day, whether it be right or be wrong, that had that influence. And so when we talk about training, it's that overconfidence in your own personal skills and abilities. And you have to really look at yourself in the mirror and be objective. Look, we are all pilots. That's the good thing, because we all have that title. The other thing is, those of us that fly as the pilot in command, there are very few of us that get to hold that title. But we have to recognize with that responsibility our own limitations. I'm a double I. I can fly in instruments, I can teach instruments and everything else. Yesterday I wouldn't have flown. Why? Because I haven't flown in 120 days in the clouds. Not because I'm afraid for me. I'm afraid for all the others. because I know that I can get caught up, but I'm going to always be half a step behind. I will take a mentor pilot. When I'm comfortable, I'll turn that mentor pilot loose. But that's my personal minimum. That's how I preserve my existence. I'm not afraid to recognize that, because my ego won't drive that decision. And we have to really break that barrier down as the PIC. And then, of course, giving up control, whether it's to the autopilot or to ATC or some other entity, and I'll talk about those here in a second. So now the question is that. Got it figured out? You got it figured out? Are you really the PIC you think you are? Again, you're not just a pilot. I can have 4 pilots in an airplane, but who's in command and control? The PIC. And now, other guys will be backseat driving. Hey, Charlie, do this. Hey, Bill, do this. No, I'm sitting here. I'm flying the airplane. I'm making the command and control decisions. I am the PIC. So if you want to be Luke, or do you want to be that guy? You don't know. You think you're him, and there are times when you're this guy. I've been there. I've done that, where I've gotten behind the airplane. I've gotten a little confused because I wasn't well prepared as I should be. I got out of my road. I got rushed. I was racing the clock, trying to get off the ground before it got dark. I had a lot of things. I was going on a trip up north. I knew the weather was gonna crap out when I got up north. I got out of my road and started to shortcut the program. I put myself in a compromising position. Fortunately, it wasn't a position of jeopardy. It was a compromising position that in the after fact, and when I really looked at it myself, I said, I'm not doing that again. It wasn't worth the headache, the sweat, and that heart-pounding anxiety that you have until you get the airplane on the ground. I don't have that worry anymore because I've set a different standard, and I won't be rushed, and I'll push everything back. I'm not worried about the clock anymore, and I'm not worried about those external influences. Now, here's a little test, and I want everybody to stare at that black dot. That's all I want you to do, is just stare intently at that black dot. That is the center of your focus, is that black dot. Keep staring at it. Don't look at anything else but that black dot. Stare at the black dot. Keep staring. Is that picture in color? If you stared at the black dot, it was in color until you looked away. Try it again. Stare at the black dot. Don't look at anything else but the black dot. Is there any shades of blue in there? Any color? It's really a black and white picture. But initially, with your focus right there at the black dot, your eyes got lazy. All of the photoreceptors, all the color receptors in your eyes got lazy. And there are 2 complementary colors, orange and blue. So you were staring there, that picture was predominantly orange. So staring at that and focusing right there, all of a sudden when I switched the picture and it was really black and white, your brain and your eyes fill in for the laziness of your eye and put color in there. That's why it looked blue and had some color. Let me give you another test. Stare at the black dot. Don't look at anything else. Stare at the black dot. Maintain your focus on the black dot. Both eyes, one eye, stare at the black dot. See any colors? And then as soon as you look away from that black dot, boom, your eyes go back to normal. That is your brain processing information, making up for, and when when it was talked about with the physiology, it also meets the psychology. The lazy part of your eye then fills everything else in to give your brain a picture. And in doing this little test, what happens is the brain creates a false reality. Those are the two complementary colors. That's why when it was orange, you could see blue like the water and that kind of stuff in the first picture. The second picture was blue, and everything came up a little orangish and that kind of stuff. They're complementary colors. But the brain fills in everything else. That's why it initially looked color, and then as soon as you looked away, boom, your brain said, that's a black and white picture. Because all the receptors in your eyes became alive again. And all it does is, that's your brain playing tricks on you. You're a machine. And there are limitations. So how do we apply that to aviation? Well, the men can relate to this. This is what we want to be. We want to be a perfect Big Mac or a perfect Whopper. Right? That's what we shoot for. That is our perfection as the PIC. Perfect. That's really what we are. A sloppy Big Mac and an ugly Whopper. Perception isn't reality. And we have this false reality sometimes of our own personal skills, abilities, and knowledge as the pilot in command. Whether it is venturing off into an environment that we really aren't prepared to handle, or transitioning from an airplane to a more complex, sophisticated airplane that we really don't have a basis of knowledge and the skills, abilities, and knowledge to enter into that airplane without assistance in some way, shape, or form. So, this is how your brain works. Your brain, nobody can multitask in this room. The human cannot multitask. It's a proven fact. It's a psychological fact. People talk about, well, he's multitasking. He's doing this and he's doing that. You're not multitasking because your brain can't do that. Because if you could, in fact, multitask, I could carry on a conversation with you and really comprehend what you're saying and talk on the phone at the same time and comprehend what the person is talking to me on the phone about. Anybody in the room besides my wife that could do that? No. We can't multitask. And what your brain does is it takes time out. So I want you to raise your thumb. I don't care what hand, just raise your thumb. And then take your other hand and take your index finger and point at it. Now, I want you to be able to take this thumb, lay it down, take that finger, go like that, and curl that, and do it real fast. Keep going. I didn't tell you to stop. Simon says keep going, man. Do it with proficiency. See, all you guys are going, okay. High stress, high anxiety situation, you don't have time to go, thumb down, finger out, thumb up. That's because your brain, at the time you're trying to do that, is trying to do multiple things. And it's actually called biomanual interference. That is, you're thinking, okay, I need to lower my thumb, drop that finger, raise this thumb, and curl this finger. Your brain takes a pause trying to figure out not what you want, how to do it. It's trying to determine what action you're asking for. You can eventually do it, and I guarantee if you sit here for the next 5 minutes, you'll get some fluency. That's the same thing with training. That's the same thing with proficiency. You're learning a new task. You're taking it initially. You're kind of making mistakes. You're getting a little sloppy. But through proficiency, it becomes rote, and it becomes very proficient. And that's what we're trying to obtain. And so through repetition and practice, whether tactily or mentally or a combination of both, you want it to be seamless. The problem becomes that if it isn't rote, and it isn't proficient, and it isn't seamless, in a high-stress, high-anxiety situation, dark and stormy night, single-engine airplane over the Rocky Mountains at night, that proficiency all goes away because now your brain starts taking pauses. What do you want me to do now? What do you want me to do now? What do you want me to do now? And you're hopping around. You really get into brain lock, and the world collapses. It is very simple. This is what keeps you out of trouble. Not the pretty panel, not the autopilot, not the airplane. It's all right here. This is a Cessna 310 that crashed in Smyrna, Tennessee. The mechanic survived, the pilot died. According to the NTSB, this is basically a short version of what they wrote. The pilot was working, they had put some new avionics in the airplane. They were on a maintenance test flight basically to certify the system, and the pilot kept pushing against the yoke with the autopilot on, so of course it's rolling trim against what the pilot was pushing and pulling and doing. And if you read this, the technician said the pilot's actions scared him and demonstrated that the pilot really didn't have control of the airplane because he didn't understand the functionality. So the mechanic told the investigators that the pilot appeared to be, quote, very disoriented with the new technology. That's what happens when you transition from steam gauge to pretty panel stuff. And then on the second flight, which was the accident flight, before the accident, everything worked just fine on the ground. But they get in the air, and of course the airplane started to pitch porpoise, and the pilot was a half a beat behind. That's what the NTSB came up with for the probable cause. Improper response to a known autopilot pitch problem contributing to the accident was the pilot's decision to perform a test flight on a system which he lacked complete working knowledge. You think you can read the manual on a Garmin 600, 700, Garmin 1000 and go out there and just fly it and it's all going to work? You're nuts. Airline pilots go to school on an airplane for how long when you're transitioning to a new airplane? How much? A month. Month to 6 weeks. When you get your new Garmin 1000 in your airplane, how long do you go to school? For as long as it takes to read that little book, sometimes. Or trial by error. You know, you get in the airplane, you start playing with it. You know, you get the airplane straight and level on a day like this, and you start testing the functionality. Are you really understanding it, or just learning a new sequence of events to make something happen? I got to change the frequency. I got to program from here to there. I got to get that magenta line. There is a substantial difference. The pilot in command is responsible for what? What does the FAA expect of us as pilots in command? Especially when you're a private pilot or a student pilot going for a private pilot check ride. If you learned in a Cessna 172 with round dials, what does the FAA expect you to be able to do if you take your check ride in a Cessna 172 with a Garmin 1000? They don't expect you to fly it by round dial. They expect you to fly it with all this pretty stuff. Well, I've never been taught that. Then why are we in this airplane? There is a big difference. So when we look at it, this is an accident that the safety board worked. I worked on it after the safety board did for other reasons. This particular airplane, if you remember the Casey Anthony accident or trial, she killed her, or it was alleged that she killed her daughter, and it was a trial down in Orlando that went on for months and months and months. Well, the attorney that was representing her used to own this airplane. So after that trial, if you remember, after she was acquitted, they put her in an airplane and flew her to an undisclosed destination. Well, that was this airplane. The airplane was eventually sold off. It was bought by a very wealthy individual. That wealthy individual, again, had transitioned into a very complex airplane. He had been flying somewhat with a mentor pilot, but not much. He's up in New York around the 4th of July and had been partying with friends for several days before. He actually canceled the flight on the day he was supposed to go because, in his estimate, the weather was bad. So he waits till the next day. He takes off with his wife, 2 friends. They climb up to 26,000 feet. They're blasting down the East Coast from New Jersey back down to Florida. As they're cruising along at 26,000 feet, he looks out about 100 miles ahead, and he can see the buildups. So he starts asking for a progressive climb. So they get him up to 28, and then they get him up to 30. Now, the maximum operating altitude, who flies a PC-12? Anybody? Maximum operating altitude in the PC-12 is 30,000 feet. So what does that mean? That's a flight manual limitation. You can't go above 30,000 feet, period. Done deal. Because that's what the flight manual says. That's what the airplane's certificated to. as he's progressing down the East Coast, and this is the radar track. Scott, did you work on this one? So as he's progressing, you can see radar track. There is some weather, and unfortunately I didn't lay in the audio, but he starts seeing this weather, so he starts asking for this progressive climb to try and deviate around some of the weather, and you can see from some of his comments, and if you listen to the audio, you can hear in his voice a little bit of anxiety. He's not really sure because he sees the weather, and he doesn't want to go anywhere near that weather, but he's progressing in a straight line. He's asked for some deviations, and because of air traffic control and saturation for arrivals and departures, they can't get him off track too much. So he progresses, and then he gets into an area, as we're coming down here, where there is a significant line of thunderstorms and lousy weather, and he decides that he doesn't want any part of that. He can't deviate far enough around it, so he's going to try and go over the top of it. And so when he asked for a deviation, they said, well, 8 Delta Charlie, you're really going to be unable to do that far east, because he wanted to go around the weather, because he was going to get into arrivals and departures and a bunch of other things. I dissect this as a case study. I'm giving you just an overview for the purpose of a point coming up. But when they can't, they say, we got a line of weather painting in the Montbello area, and it's a very long line. Well, that long line is this. So he wanted to deviate. They couldn't get him that far to the east, and he was going to deviate. He did deviate a bit, but of course the intensity of the weather. Now he's sitting on top of this weather. He sees the buildups, but he's actually over the top of this weather. And the fear factor that he had, based on information that the safety board got some of it, we got some other stuff after that, and that was, he wasn't really confident in his skills, abilities, and knowledge flying an IMC. And that's why he was progressively trying to climb up over the top to stay VFR on top over the top of that thunderstorm. He eventually took this airplane, or tried to go up to 32,000 feet. He exceeded the MOA of the airplane. He couldn't go to 32,000 feet legally, but he tried. And as he got into this weather, the airplane became unstable. The airplane's on autopilot, and you can see some pitch angle perturbations. He's on the autopilot. He gets into a stall condition because it's got a stick pusher. It kicks off the autopilot. The nose falls. He pulls. He goes back up, turns the autopilot back on, and did that basically 3 times. So the airplane is porpoising till the last time, when he finally lost the airplane and got into an 80-degree nose-low attitude. And he well exceeded the maximum speed of the airplane. And unfortunately, as he was descending, and you can see that he's in a turn, he got several stick pushers, maximum dive speed was exceeded as well, and that's all that's left of a PC-12 and 4 people. That is the entire airplane. That's how fragmented it was, because he came down from 32,000 feet like a missile. Yes, sir, Mr. Test Pilot, exactly. And the reason for that is why? Because he put himself in that position of jeopardy. Nobody else did. He did. And it was all because of his own personal lack of skills, abilities, and knowledge. And he was trying to do things that were comfortable to him as a pilot in command. And that was try and stay on top, VFR on top, because he didn't have the confidence. Literally, all he had to do is stay at 28,000 feet with the autopilot on. He would have gotten a few bumps, but all of that weather was well below him. It's just that when you map it on weather radar on his airplane, which he had, and you get XM and everything else, that composite picture doesn't show you where all those multiple layers are. So he thought he was going to be flying into it, because he could see basically the billowing anvil up in front of him, and he was going to try and hop over the top. But he took the airplane into a realm of flight that only guys like him fly at to see what the airplane's going to do, and that is he became the test pilot, because he lacked those skills, abilities, and knowledge, and the comfort to be able to fly through IMC. He had an airplane that could handle it just fine. Just leave the autopilot on. Just point it in the direction you want it to go. But he didn't do enough planning ahead of time to really understand the environment that he was going to operate. And he's flying a $2.5 million airplane. So all of this stuff in front of you is not going to keep you out of trouble. It's all right here. That was one of the biggest pieces of the airplane that was left. Now, those of you, how many people saw me last year? Oh, good. I got a couple of virgins in the room then. One of the things that I use this particular video or audio for is to exemplify a variety of different things. This is a very good case study audio that I accumulated when I was working for the NTSB in the Denver field office. It was a Cessna 210 that was flown by a pilot who wanted to be an airline pilot. He was a Boulder cop, worked in Boulder, and he got a job interview with SkyWest Airlines. So he rented a Cessna 210 out of Boulder, was flying to St. George, Utah for his interview. He had the trip trade, that is, he had to talk to his partner and say, hey, I need to be off on this particular day because I'm going for an interview. Can you cover my shift and I'll cover yours tomorrow? And they said, yeah, okay, great. So 6 o'clock in the morning, he takes off out of Boulder, Colorado, heading to St. George, Utah. He gets there at about 9 o'clock, goes through the entire interview process that day, but now he's pushing the clock because he has to get back to cover the shift of his partner. And so he has got an accumulation of self-induced pressure. Now the weather has gone down. He takes off out of St. George at night, single pilot, single engine, over the Rocky Mountains. There is forecast thunderstorms, embedded icing, turbulence. He gets on track. Where we're going to pick this audio up, and last year when I used it to talk about the fact that this pilot with his aeronautical decision making didn't make some very good decisions. This year, he is the pilot in command, and the emphasis that I want you to listen to, you're going to pick it up at 6477 November. That's not the airplane, but you're going to be listening for the call sign 6477 November. You'll listen to the pilot. He sounds very professional, very calm, but as the situation starts to deteriorate, there are certain key things along the way that you need to listen for, because we're going to talk about it afterwards. But this is a demonstration. Here's a young man who wants to be an airline pilot. He believes that he has the requisite skills, abilities, and knowledge, and meets all the qualifications to go out and be a commercial pilot. Yet the decisions that he makes in this airplane on this trip are not representative, I would hope, if he had survived, of what his decisions would have been as a commercial airline pilot. So we'll play it, and I'll give you a little bit of interjection because some of the audio, there's some crosstalk as well with other airplanes, but we'll go through it and then we'll dissect it real quick. So Steve, will you play that for me? Was the actual ATC tape. Here you had a young man, 32 years old, aspirations to be a professional pilot. He had to know what the weather was going to be. He had to file an IFR flight plan. He got the briefing. He understood the conditions, the risks, single engine, single pilot at night over the Rocky Mountains to accomplish the mission. And the mission was to get home so he could go back to work the next day. He starts out calm, just like any of us. He sees weather, he gets into weather, he's asking for assistance. But as he escalates, all of a sudden now, he tries to turn control of the airplane over to who? The air traffic controller. I'm telling you things, I'm asking you things, and then what does he finally do? He concedes to, I need some help up here. What help do you expect the controller to give you? The controller can't fly the airplane for you. The controller is bound by altitudes. A friend of mine here is a professional controller. He's an investigator with the NTSB for air traffic control. I've got these boundaries. I can't do much more than this. So you tell me what you want to do. I'm giving you some latitude here. Can you direct me to an area that's clear of weather? Well, what does the controller say? I'm not showing any weather, and I definitely don't show any icing conditions. And you know what, dude? Guess what? I'm telling you, I'm in it. Here's my PIREP. I'm in icing. I need some assistance. Well, he couldn't drop him because the MEA in that area is 16,000 feet. But if the controller really looked, he could have headed him north, turned him north, and the terrain slopes down and give him a little bit of latitude and some assistance because the MEA changes. The fact is that this pilot initiated a flight into conditions. This wasn't unknown to him. This wasn't something that just popped up that he wasn't aware of. He knowingly put himself as the pilot in command in a position of jeopardy for which he lost. And the question is why? I'm a professional. I want to be a professional aviator, yet he makes these bad decisions because of this external influence of whatever it may have been. But the point being is that it can happen to any one of us. We think we have the mindset to be professional, but there are a lot of things going on. You get into a little bit of turbulence, the people you're flying with don't like it, they become a distraction. All of a sudden now you're trying to deal with them and make them comfortable, and you're doing things with the airplane that you know you probably shouldn't do, or going places you probably shouldn't be, trying to calm the fear. But by doing that, you've now gotten out of rote, taken yourself out of the prudent position as the pilot in command, and you may start making decisions that aren't what a prudent pilot who has the command authority to make. And this is the problem. And Scott has heard it, I've heard it, where we've heard pilots get themselves into a situation where all of a sudden they're looking for help. The controller can't help you. They can't fly your airplane. And they have very good, well, the radar's getting better, their weather information is getting better, but they are limited. They are hamstrung, and they can't physically take over for you. The only one that's up there to save the day is you. The message being, don't put yourself in that position, because it's not only you. And these are the faces of the people that have trusted and entrusted their life to the PIC, who made a bad decision and put them in peril to the point of killing them. These aren't just passengers behind a door. These are family members. These are friends. These are the people that get jeopardized on the ground when you lose control of your airplane because of the bad decision as a pilot in command that you made. And we owe it not only to ourselves, but to those of us who entrust their life. It's just like getting in a car with your kids. They believe that you are going to do the right thing and not put them in a position of peril. Your family, your friends, anybody that gets in an automobile. But it quadruples when they get in an airplane, because you have demonstrated to them, I have a pilot's license, I have an airplane. Technically, I should be making good, sound judgment decisions. And when you start doing, hold my beer, watch this, I'll show you something, that's the scary part. And it may not be as blatant as that, but when you venture off into weather that is marginal, that you know that you can't handle based on your own skills, abilities, and knowledge, and you know that the airplane could be marginally performing in those same weather conditions, now you've put everybody in jeopardy, and that command decision was very bad. These are the people that we fly for. It's all of us, not only in the airplane, but on the ground. And that's why when I think about flying, and I know that when you think about flying, you know what? It's not worth, it's just definitely not worth the risk. And that's what risk management is all about. And again, we have to drop the ego. We have to look at our own personality. I know the get-home-itis and everything else, and people go, oh, I'd never do that. And guess what? Those are the people that we look at. Unfortunately, they don't make it home. So the message here is, you have been entrusted by the Federal Aviation Administration when they issued that certificate and said, you are a pilot with these privileges. And one of those privileges is to be in command and control of a single-engine airplane, a multi-engine airplane, a balloon, it doesn't matter. You have been entrusted by the FAA with the responsibility to make the decisions, to execute whatever kind of flight you're going to execute from point A to point B safely and prudently. That's what this is all about. That's what safety is all about. And that's what the responsibility and the honor of being a pilot. How many certified pilots are there in the United States? 700,000+. How many of us are actually flying? Not 700,000. So we get to do something. And how many people are here in these United States? About 330 million. Guess what? We're a very small percentage. We have a privilege. We have a responsibility, but we have the honor of being able to aviate when a lot of people can't. And we have to take that very seriously every single time we even think about taking an aircraft out to go fly. Not when you get in, before you get in. That's where this all starts. That's where you, as a pilot in command, your responsibility starts. Not when you set foot in the aircraft, but well before it. Yes, sir. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Go ahead.
Scott can vouch for me. I'm a controller as well as a pilot. Hello, Scott. I have a slightly different perspective. As a CFII, absolutely agree with you 110% that the PIC should not relinquish control of the airplane to a controller in an emergency. With my controller hat on, I have a slightly different perspective without disagreeing one iota. Nonetheless, there's a lot of occasions where pilots do ask the controllers in an emergency for a whole lot of assistance, and whether they should or shouldn't, at that point, they already have. So quick question, and maybe you can answer this later with a little more
Sure.
time, but quick question. As a controller, what is best for me to do kind of big picture? Just remind them with a calm voice, aviate, navigate, and I'll do controller things? So again, if you understand the question, I don't want the question, but once I get it, I have to respond.
That's if the question's asked. First off, what did this pilot not do? He never declared an emergency. So he never got the undivided attention of the controller. He still had other airplanes on frequency that he had having to deal with. You heard the United guys check in and everything else. Had he used that magic word, I've got an emergency or I'm declaring a mayday, what's your responsibility as the air traffic controller? You get rid of everybody else and now you can focus your attention on assisting him. You can't fly his airplane from the ground. He can only ask for assistance, which he tried in an indirect way. He was doing a lot of talking, wasn't doing a lot of communicating, because the controller kept clearing him to go up and he wanted to go down. And then what did he try to do? He tried to comply with what the controller would, I got you cleared up to 210, go for it. And he goes, well, I'm going to try. Well, that airplane was an ice cube. It had an inch of ice on it. As soon as he pulled back just a little bit, you heard the stall warning horn go off. He stalled the airplane. Once that was done, it was done. And there was no salvaging that bad situation. I agree with you, but you can't turn control over to the controller because the controller can't do anything other than provide you with information. Go here, do this, do that, here's the weather. But they can't physically fly the airplane and get you out of that bad situation. So I agree with you 1,000%. But you can't be clairvoyant to know that he needs that assistance. That he or she needs to say, I need some assistance, I'm declaring an emergency, I need your undivided attention because I'm in a bad situation. I agree with you 1,000%. The point being here is that the pilot or the controller cannot physically fly that airplane, period.
I mean, there's certainly agreement that the controller can't fly the airplane, but a controller can, and this is my question, but a controller can declare an emergency on behalf of the pilot. And when you listen to this guy losing it along the way, I'm not sure that that was not have been an option. I know you don't want to blame the controller ever. He got himself into this. It's not his fault. But I'm not 100% in the camp that the controller might not have been able to clear him to land, to go lower, vector him down, whatever it was. But be that as it may.
The investigation showed that. There were other options. I'm trying to use this for a specific point.
No, I understand.
Without dissecting the entire accident.
Right.
There was a lot of joy to be spread amongst a bunch of people.
But this guy was hurting badly, and the controller could have done more than tell the UA guy, I got to go. This guy needs my help, and just declare for him.
Correct.
And then the MEAs, for example, that you cited, go away.
Yeah.
And he could have been vectored down. He has 9,000 feet was available to him to the right.
Correct.
Question for you though, on the declaration of emergencies, we have a test pilot here. He's a better pilot than I am. He's a better pilot than I'll ever be, probably. And the question is, if you find yourself in a situation that you had planned, everything was planned normally, but stuff happens, and you feel that you're now approaching the limits of your own abilities, when does someone declare, and when do you think it's appropriate to declare an emergency in that situation where, frankly, you know, if you'd had higher skills, you might be able to pull this off. Chuck Yeager's a better pilot than I am. I know that.
But the airplane iced up, and I don't care if Chuck Yeager's flying the airplane.
Oh,
Scott
yeah.
Crossfield, who was a friend of mine, flew into a level 3 thunderstorm. So
Right, and that's
it's
you know,
not about the skill base; it's about the decision making.
Well, but there's the guy who flies drunk, the guy who flies into a thunderstorm and says, "Hell, I can man it through." Right? Those are almost suicide by pilot. Right? At some point, if you're going to fly drunk and stoned, well, I don't know that we learn a lot from that. The people in this room don't learn a lot from that. We're not idiots, and that guy's an idiot.
But you had an in-flight breakup of a PC-12 by a guy who wasn't drunk, wasn't stoned, had his family, and inadvertently flew into a level 4 thunderstorm. And the question is, what was it? It wasn't the airplane that flew him there. It was his decision-making. It was his lack of skills, abilities, and knowledge and understanding of the system and the weather information and the lack of updating and things like that. That put that pilot in the position of jeopardy. I agree with you. There are certain things where, yeah, you're not going to learn anything.
My question is, we're flying along at our level of skills. It's too late to get any better at flying when you're flying along, and you start to feel that this is at the limits of my abilities. The plane's not breaking up. When do you declare, when do you think a conservative pilot should use the word Mayday and try to get as much help as he can on his side?
You ask a very good question. The problem is that it's gonna differ for everyone in this room based on what you brought up, and that is skills, abilities, and knowledge. Comfort with the aircraft, comfort with your own skills. The point being is if you declare an emergency by the FAA standard, you can't put yourself in an emergency situation by your own doing. Now, that's a very nebulous part of declaring an emergency, because the FAA says, well, hell, if you blasted off and you knew there was a level 5 and you tried to penetrate it, you put yourself in that position. You can't declare an emergency and you get out of the jail, get out of jail free kind of thing. If you find yourself in a position that, because of weather, because of other circumstances, it's your comfort level. When you drive, when you evaluate the highway or the road after it's snowed and you got black ice on it, your comfort level with driving on that black ice is going to be different than mine. Why? Because I got a Volvo. I got all-wheel drive. I got airbags. I know that I'm not going to drive 60. I'm going to drive 30. You have a four-wheel pickup truck or a two-wheel pickup truck. You go out there, you're going to be sliding all over the place. So your comfort level is going to definitely be different than mine, even though you've had that truck for 20 years. I can't really give you a very patent answer. The fact is that you get yourself into a situation, you could hear in this guy's voice the anxiety and the stress start to escalate. That's the point where I'll declare an emergency. My emergency is I want your undivided attention because I know what the weather was like when I came from that place. I'm going to make a 180-degree turn and go back to that place, or I'm going to go back to an area that I can at least land at. I don't want to keep going there because it's not getting any better. So it's really an evaluation. He had options. Whether the controller helped him out or not, he had options. He knew what the weather was like because it was okay for an hour and a half till he got to this point. So I'm going to go back 30 minutes or 40 minutes and go land at Cedar City and all these other places that he had an option for. So, and again, that's why you have to stay plugged in. You got that pretty little moving map? Go to nearest. Look at all the airports back along your flight path. So there are a lot of tools available. The only thing I was looking at with this air traffic control is the controller got flustered because he kept telling the pilot one thing. They were talking, but they weren't communicating. I'm clearing him up, thinking he's helping him. He put him in a position of jeopardy because the guy wanted to go down because he couldn't maintain altitude. And when the controller said, well, I'll show you at 19.6. Yeah, well, he was supposed to be at 210. He never made it there, and he tried to get up there, and then he lost the airplane. So I agree. There are, and again, we could sit here and with Scott and you, we could dissect the controller's performance. It wasn't stellar. The point being is that controller physically could not help that pilot in any way, shape, or form to get out of that situation, or even prevent it. They're kind of tied. The air traffic controllers are a tool, just like all the other tools I have in that airplane, whether it's a moving map, my iPad, or whatever I use. That is just another tool to be used. What's the weather? What's my altitude? Can I do this? Can I go here? Can you get me to a VFR place versus an icing IFR place that way? That's really the point. Utilizing the tools, but you are not the standard. I can't just, here you go, it's your airplane. because they can't do anything with it.
So, Greg,
Yeah.
looks like we're coming up on the end of our time here.
Yep,
so-
I'm going to just finish this up real quick.
Thanks.
3 things to remember. My mantra, I preach it all the time. First one is you have to have the attitude. You have to maintain the attitude to do the right thing even when nobody's looking. You have to establish your baseline. You have to establish your limitations. Period. That is the hard line. You don't deviate. You don't wander. You can always go below that line, but you can't go above that line unless you have the confidence, the skills, abilities, knowledge, proficiency to be able to go and edge that line up. It all starts with your attitude, 100% all the time. You 70% attitude, 70% performance. It's very simple. You have to have the discipline. You have to have the self-discipline to maintain the attitude. But you have to have that discipline to do the right thing and be able to say yes when you need to say yes and no when you need to say no. You can't get wishy-washy. You can't waver. You can't. Because if you do, what happens? Now you put self-doubt in there. And when you put self-doubt into the equation, now you lose the confidence to execute and execute properly. Because you don't trust yourself. And then you start doing so many things, your world starts to collapse on you. So you have to have the discipline. And then, of course, you have to have the motivation to have the discipline, to have the attitude. There are a lot of people that have a lot of self-discipline. Other people will be disciplined if you give them a little swift kick. I got a 16-year-old. Trust me. He isn't disciplined and he definitely isn't self-motivated unless I give him a swift kick. Once I get him pointed in the right direction, he'll do the right thing. But it's the motivation. That's probably the hardest part. And if you take motivation out, the other two don't matter. Because those will be situational. It's like turning on the light switch. I'll be motivated, I'll have the attitude when I get in the airplane. No, you better have it before you ever get to the airport. ADM, very simple principle. That's what it's all about. You're flying in my airspace. So as a PIC, I expect you to make the decisions that are prudent so that you don't jeopardize me as the PIC in my airplane. That's what it's all about. I appreciate you taking the time out of your morning. Again, these are the kinds of things. I appreciate the interaction. I appreciate the questions. I wish the FAA liked me a little more. They'd give me more time. But it's just marginal here. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.